Tonight, we're going to be talking about some of the most important developments, especially when it comes to the ceasefire. We're having reports that Israel has given the green light in principle to a settlement in Lebanon. However, there's one big thing. The cabinet still hasn't approved this, and they're going to be meeting tomorrow to discuss the approval of this ceasefire in Lebanon. And before I get into the details of the reports coming out, I'll give you a bit of a background as to what led us to this moment and what's likely to happen, especially with the Lebanese front in general and Gaza as well. So Hezbollah, of course, participated in the Al-Aqsa flood or Tufan Al-Aqsa on the 8th of October with limited attacks on certain Israeli monitoring locations and spying locations next to the borders. And they told Israel that if you stop the war in Gaza, our attacks will stop, and that these attacks are limited, intended to exhaust as much as possible, increasingly, from the Israeli army so that they do not take out their full force on Gaza. They have succeeded in this. Israel gradually started to escalate with Lebanon, and Hezbollah told them at the time, the more you increase, the more we increase. Then Hezbollah actually implemented and followed up on all of their promises, whether when it comes to the intensity of missiles used, the weapons used, the depths of areas that they reached. And now we are at a stage where central Israel, the central occupied territory cities, are under Hezbollah fire, with yesterday being the biggest attack since this war began. Hezbollah firing up to 500 missiles in one day on all parts leading to Tel Aviv and even south to Tel Aviv, on the day where Netanyahu was actually meeting to discuss the ceasefire coming with Lebanon. And Israel did not escalate with Lebanon on a massive scale up until the recent months following the assassination of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah and some of their leading figures. However, Hezbollah proved after these attacks that they are able to indeed continue and give Israel very painful blows, which is something that we have seen indeed in recent months. Israel did not prepare for a day like this, like what we're having now, to discuss a potential ceasefire with Lebanon so quickly. Israel has over 5 divisions on the borders with Lebanon, over 65,000 Israeli soldiers in total. You're talking about a number of forces enough to reach Beirut. In 1982, Israel reached Beirut in 1982. They reached Beirut in 6 days only. And now all of this campaign and all of this escalation coming primarily to save Benjamin Netanyahu, they haven't been able to hardly touch any of the Lebanese territories. And the Lebanese fighters are putting their heads in the mud, putting the genocide soldiers' faces in the mud and humiliating them every single day, including their constant attacks deep into the genocide territories inside of Israel. So they did not really want to end anything, and they were planning to occupy large chunks of South Lebanon. They assumed that by assassinating Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah and the leading figures of Lebanon, that they will kill the spirit of the Lebanese people, or the freedom-loving people in Lebanon, to be more accurate, and have a defeated mentality, instill a defeated mentality when it comes to the Lebanese resistance. However, what they've done only fueled the fire in the spirits of all of the resistance supporting people in Lebanon, everyone who supports human rights, everyone who supports stopping the war crimes and having equal rights and confronting this child murdering criminal entity. So they continued, and we reached a massive stage yesterday, and that proved to be a massive contributor to the signs that we're seeing coming from Israel, that they are kneeling down in the face of Hezbollah. They are bowing down They're backing down because of the strength of the Lebanese resistance, led primarily by Hezbollah. Now, what are we talking about? We're talking about a limited ceasefire that would be for 2 months, that would be followed by a permanent declaration. Benjamin Netanyahu, before the big escalation with Lebanon, he added something to the conditions of the war, to the objectives of the war. So previously, the objectives of the war only revolved around Gaza, eliminating Hamas, getting all of the Israeli prisoners of war back, and making sure Gaza does not pose a threat again. Tensions rose in Israel and protests reached peak levels. 800,000 Israelis in the streets at one point to tell their prime minister that he is a criminal, he is a mass killer, killing Israelis primarily and giving up on the Israeli prisoners of war for his own sake, and sending people to die for no reason, apart from his own greed and his own psychopathic, narcissistic reasons. That's why he started to escalate with Hezbollah, so that he can take away and divert the attention from him to this war. He started to escalate, and he was planning to do something much bigger than what has been achieved in Lebanon. He was planning to occupy large chunks of the Lebanese territories, have settlements in Lebanon, and have instilled an internal civil war against Hezbollah through internal agents and traitors from within Lebanon. There were people in Lebanon who were hoping that Hezbollah would indeed be defeated, but Hezbollah, like the resistance in general, proved that they are unbeatable. They cannot be defeated. Why? Because they are establishing themselves on just causes, and because resistance is a side effect or an antidote to a problem, the problem still exists. So long that the problem still exists, which is in the form of this cancerous Zionism, occupying Palestine and doing all of these war crimes against the people, you will still have resistance forever up until you get rid of this cancerous problem called Zionism. So they tried to have certain talks with Lebanon after they realized that they wouldn't be able to succeed with the Lebanese resistance. At one point, Israel was trying to dictate certain measures being taken against Lebanon, have these new resolutions in to only serve the genocide entity and go against Lebanon, dictate who's involved and who's not involved, all of these talks, but they backed down. They wanted a veto against France. They didn't want their involvement out of the way. They wanted unilateral enforcement out of the way. They wanted Hezbollah to disarm out of the way. They wanted Hezbollah to back up to the Litani River out of the way. Everything is out of the way. Every single thing is out of the way, and every single thing is out of the way for one reason, purely for the strength of the armed resistance Israel is facing, because they only understand the language of force. No other talk is understood by Israel. So long as there is no resistance facing Israel, they would continue to do what they want. But the fact of the matter is, Hezbollah have prepared tremendously well for these days, and now they are imposing their will on Israel. The ceasefire we're talking about now is a proposal coming from the United States administration that would include countries. And mind you, this is something very, very important to note before we get into more and more details about this ceasefire, is that not everything has been published. As a matter of fact, the majority of things haven't been published. And that's how generally ceasefire agreements succeed, without revealing too many details initially. But what we can understand are things being clear from that agreement, especially things like Israel giving up certain conditions simply due to the fact that they are continuing with the ceasefire. But we don't know the extent of the countries involved, but what we do know is that countries such as the United States, France, Britain, Russia, Syria, and Iran was involved. But again, not a lot of clarity when it comes to that. The ceasefire we're talking about speaks about 2 months, during which Israel still wouldn't retreat fully from Lebanon. But 2 months of no fire between Hezbollah and Israel, during which certain reports said that people can start going back to the south, and Israel is saying people can also go back to the north. Now, when it comes to the Lebanese side, everyone in Lebanon is willing to, there's going to be a process, and people who are able to go back to some of their homes, they would be, apart from those that have been destroyed. But when it comes to Israel, Israel is facing a big problem. Israel is facing a massive problem with the northern settlements that they have, the squatting establishment, because they're actually releasing videos now saying how Netanyahu neglected them. Netanyahu and his government neglected them, because a part of the reason he went there was due to the fourth objective of the war, and the only one that deals with the northern front, that said we want to return the Israelis back to the north. And these people said, maybe if the Kiryat Shmone, head of the municipality of Kiryat Shmone, he said that if the government ministers will go to live in Kiryat Shmone, maybe we will go and live in Kiryat Shmone. But so far, nothing has changed, and we refuse to go back to the same reality that we had on the 6th of October. The fact that the people who are the most important when it comes to the Lebanese question from an internal Israeli perspective are having a tremendously negative approach when it comes to the ceasefire agreement indicates how much in favor of Lebanon that ceasefire agreement is, and how much it did not serve Israel with anything apart from just stopping having a ceasefire and stopping the fighting for a limited period of time. The fact that these people are saying these things in Lebanon, in Israel, indicates that it's a massive retreat, a massive back down coming from Israel. But we're not talking about an all-out ceasefire. We are talking about a limited ceasefire, and I wanted to share some of the articles that have been published in this regard in Israeli media, just to give you a bit more information. And we will also talk about why it reached this stage in terms of defeat and massive losses internally with the IDF, the security units of Israel, and their lack of capacity to even continue the war. And we're also going to be talking about Gaza and how that is linked to Gaza. So the main articles that were published in Israel, that the green light was given. After the discussion with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, officials in Lebanon, the United States, and Israel confirmed last night, Sunday, that Israel gave the green light subject to a final decision by the cabinet, and that is tomorrow, to sign the settlement in Lebanon. On the other hand, an Israeli source claimed that after publication that although there is a willingness and principled intention to move forward, there are still things to be are on the agenda. According to him, it is not close, but the direction is positive. However, when it learned that U.S. envoy Amos Hochstein informed Lebanon last night Israel's agreement to the settlement. So Hochstein already told Lebanon that Israel accepted this settlement. However, again, we cannot confirm anything up until we have a confirmation tomorrow from the war cabinet, and they are likely to have this confirmation. And then they added that Hezbollah, of course, significantly increased the rate of fire at Israel. Here they're saying more than 255 launches. Israel yesterday confirmed that we indeed had 500 warnings coming from Israel, sirens indicating that 500 projectiles were launched from Lebanon and detected by the Israeli systems to Israel, that targeted Israel. Actually 541 alarms in Lebanon. Now, this was one of the reports when it comes to the ceasefire talk coming from Israel, and we also had another one here continuing the talk about the potential of a ceasefire being declared within hours based on certain reports coming from Lebanon. Here they said that the American state confidently there will be a series, and Netanyahu is expected to present the details and agreement by the cabinet tomorrow, which will begin with a 60-day pilot. This was the 2-month period that we were talking about. It's going to be limited, and then we're going to be talking about something more permanent. The heads of the coalition will also meet. Officials in Lebanon claim the U.S. has informed that a ceasefire may be announced today. France will take part in the monitoring committee, despite opposition from the UN. A political official said these are the differences between Resolution 1701 and the current agreement assessment in the U.S. deal in Gaza. So the assessment in the U.S. saying that we will have a deal in Gaza alongside with the deal in Lebanon. And in Israel, they also reported that, apart from this report, it is not guaranteed that we will have a ceasefire with Gaza, not denying that there will be something to do with Gaza. Why is it not very clear when it comes to Gaza, and why might we see a certain period where a ceasefire might start in Lebanon but continue slightly in Gaza and then have a ceasefire in Gaza? It's because Israel wouldn't want to show that they are agreeing to both at the same time. When it comes to negotiations between Israel and the Palestinian resistance or the Lebanese resistance, many things are kept unpublished up until the moment we reach the deal, and many things are not published because it has been agreed upon by the two parties, primarily to save face. So from an Israeli perspective, let me give you an example. In 2014, they had a long war with many massacres in Gaza that ended after approximately 51 days, following which Hamas forced Israel to retreat up to the internal Israeli territories because they were occupying what they call the security line next to Gaza. And they also increased the capacity when it comes to fishing. None of these things were reported. And Hamas at one point had monitoring points on the borders with Israel because according to the agreement, Israel couldn't touch them, and they did not. These things weren't published initially because if they are published from an Israeli perspective, right, it would be agreed upon. Usually, again, no guarantee to be the same thing with all CISO, but I'm giving you a background so that you can know. Israel wouldn't be able to tolerate it internally. Why? Because now it's about the phase of justification. You know, not many people will tell you what I told you, like Hezbollah forces Israel to back down, or Israel submits to the will of Hezbollah and stuff like that, or the opposite. When it comes to both sides, they will try and be as diplomatic as possible, quiet. Why? Because they want things to be implemented. That's the objective. So even if it comes at a price of one side declaring victory, they would want to have this ceasefire. So, and like we said before, when it comes to Gaza, by the way, seeing as we're reading about this assessment in the United States that we'll have a deal in Gaza, will most likely be followed simultaneously with this or shortly after this, so that firstly Israel would say, oh no, there wasn't necessarily a link. Israel could try and capitalize on that. Mind you, you might see a lot of twisted voices coming out who hate the resistance that will try and say anything negative about the resistance like they have previously. Some people would have any excuse to criticize any part of the resistance just to cover up their shameful lack of action or complicity with genocide. And again, these people are worth nothing, so it's pointless to even address them. But some people will be talking, so you need to remember that. However, when it comes to Gaza, Hezbollah sacrificed their Secretary General for Gaza. Hezbollah sacrificed their top figures for Gaza. Hezbollah sacrificed with their leaders, with their men, with their women, with their money, with their houses, with their property for Gaza. So no one can go and tell Hezbollah that they haven't sacrificed for Gaza. Hezbollah was the biggest party that sacrificed for Palestine and for the people of Gaza in this war after the Palestinians in Gaza. Hezbollah and the Lebanese people, because they directly confronted this child murdering war criminal entity to try and reach a ceasefire with Gaza. And they had all of these sacrifices. And despite the fact that it's going to be very likely that we would have a ceasefire that will be shortly done, or some sort of a ceasefire agreement. And again, remember, when we talk about the ceasefire, that doesn't mean the end of the war, and that doesn't mean a permanent ceasefire. This in Lebanon is a pilot thing for 60 days. In Gaza, ceasefire, 3 phases. This is what we initially heard, without a confirmation from Israel that they will continue. And one of the reasons that Israel is accepting this ceasefire in Lebanon is because they would still have an opportunity to wage the war again on Lebanon after they try and recover some of their losses. Because one of the main things that they're having this ceasefire with Lebanon is because their genocide troops have been going back to the genocide state in body bags from Lebanon. Hezbollah have been annihilating the genocide army in South Lebanon, and they have been annihilating Unit 8200 as well. When it comes to, and I'll get to one article, by the way, when it comes to Unit 8200, crisis you're talking about, crisis that is hidden. We have a failed state when it comes to Israel. It's a failed entity going to collapse, ladies and gentlemen. Failed army, failed security establishment, failed politicians, failed prime minister who has an arrest warrant issued against him, and his ex-defense minister now. So that's likely to happen. And also, Osama Hamdan, one of the senior figures in Hamas, said we welcome any ceasefire in Lebanon, regardless of anything. We welcome any ceasefire in Lebanon because they have sacrificed for Gaza so much, without, again, elaborating too much, because too much talk in a sensitive period can be harmful. Why? Because, again, there are certain things that need to be protected. However, it is exceptionally unlikely that this is what we can say, because you can't be totally conclusive. Things can happen. It is exceptionally unlikely to have a ceasefire in Lebanon that wouldn't be tied in one point at a certain time with Gaza to have a ceasefire, because don't forget, we're only talking about a pilot period. This report continued. Will long weeks of talks lead to a ceasefire within hours? And then they were saying about the fact that Joe Biden had these talks about a ceasefire previously, and now we might have a ceasefire declared within hours. Who's upset? The people who are of most concern to the ceasefire in Lebanon. Who are they? The residents of the north, who have been expelled from their homes for over a year now, living in hotels or permanently leaving their residential location, or permanently leaving Israel, by the way. One of these settlements, Kiryat Shmoni, we had a poll over 2 months back in which 80% of the Kiryat Shmoni residents who left their homes said, we will not go back, ceasefire or not. Now, what does that tell you? Anthony Blinken himself said Israel lost sovereignty over the north. People underestimate the level of effect this campaign from the Lebanese resistance inflicted on this genocide entity, in particular in the north. People lost faith in their country. People are losing faith in this false idea of Zionism. They're realizing it's all a facade. So the residents of the north, they released this video here. I'm just going to try and...
Looking for investment ideas? Get inspired by investors worldwide on eToro.
About Hezbollah basically still operating. Hezbollah still operating, and the fact that they have been fooled by Netanyahu.
אנחנו במאבק גדול מאוד. אנחנו חייבים בגבול הצפון לשנות את המציאות הביטחונית.
And they're quoting Netanyahu saying that we are in a big battle, we need to change the security reality.
סוף פסוק יהיה,
We will change
שנשנה את
it,
המציאות הביטחונית שם,
it will be new reality,
בדרום.
like we changed it in the south.
אבל אנחנו בקרב על החיים, בקרב על הבית, זה לא הגזמה, זה לא הפרזה, זה המלחמה. זה להיות או לחדול, הם
As
צריכים
in to
לחדול.
be or not to be as
אנחנו
well,
עכשיו בקרב,
and they need to cease, basically, right? And and basically they're showing the soldiers of Hezbollah here, right? And all of his statements and promises to the north. And here they're asking, Bibi, are you the prime minister of Israel or are you the prime minister of Lebanon? The blood of the residents of the north will be on your hands. This video was published and edited by the residents of the Israeli north to Benjamin Netanyahu, because he's about to have this ceasefire agreement, limited, not limited, pilot, no pilot. They couldn't care less, these people. Why? Because they left their homes from their perspective. Homes on stolen lands, on stolen villages. And of course, you know, don't take it. I know some people start to talk. Of course, we know that. But I'm saying, you know, they have a problem. They have a problem with that. And from their perspective, it's the country that's promising them all of this safety, going back against everything that they have said when it comes to this safety. Here, they're also raising the question of, will the series or this pilot help advance an agreement with Gaza? Here, and look at this. The great achievement for Israel, say sources in Jerusalem, is the disconnection of arenas. So Israel is trying to portray it as a disconnection. Limited, not limited, ceasefire now, ceasefire tomorrow. What do we have in the agreement? Nothing. Nothing elaborated with that, okay? But they are saying that this is a disconnection. Although from a Hezbollah perspective, no one said anything about the disconnection. But here they're saying that there might be some sort of a ceasefire with Gaza as well, especially when it comes to the American estimation. And when it comes to the American estimation of having a potential ceasefire with Gaza as well to be followed, that means a lot for Israel. Why does it mean a lot? Because the United States, they decide. If the United States wants to stop this, we could have stopped it a year ago. The United States is enabling all of this and pushing for all of this. Now, when it comes to the damage, of course, and we're talking about what's leading to this moment. And again, nothing is confirmed so long as we don't have a cabinet approval, okay? A cabinet approval tomorrow. Netanyahu is going to be sitting down with the cabinet and talking tomorrow. This is one of the other reasons that they're having this. Israeli spy unit 8,200 in the worst crisis in its history. They have been targeted by Hezbollah so many times in the Galilot. US news site Axis, quoting former Israeli intelligence officer, said that the occupation's army's unit 8,200 cyber spy outfit is in the worst crisis in history after its failures following the 7th of October and repeated successful strike inflicted on it. Don't forget, Yossi Sariel is still missing, the head of 8,200 unit. Hezbollah targeted him, and at the time there was a confirmation that 73 people were killed from that unit, and all of a sudden Sariel resigns after a while, not to be seen after that. Many indications say that he was killed, the head of the 8,200 unit. But again, of course, Israel did not confirm. However, we haven't seen anything from him. So these repeated blows are very, very important when it comes to reaching this moment, when it comes to Hezbollah. So in short, and to wrap up this whole scenario, there are positive signs coming from all sides, Israel, from Lebanon, from the United States. We haven't had any confirmation from Hezbollah about anything. From their perspective, they're continuing to fight, and there's a negotiation process, fine. But they're focusing on what they have to do. But in Israel, there's a massive campaign to try and justify this potential ceasefire that the people most concerned with, who are the residents of the north, of the occupied territories, are calling it a submission agreement to Hezbollah. Basically, Israel submitting to the will, backing down to Hezbollah, and accepting everything to do with them, and neglecting the people of the north, calling Benjamin Netanyahu prime minister with the blood of the people of the north on his hands. They're not even blaming Hezbollah, they're blaming Benjamin Netanyahu. And with regards to Gaza, again, certain things will be shady in that period. During this period, many corrupt voices will try and instill division between both resistance fronts or the other resistance movements as well in the region, to talk about all sorts of scenarios and try and cause problems. This is what Israel wants, and this is what the United States wants. So this is something very important that many people need to be wary of, because like I said, Hezbollah, after the people of Gaza and the Lebanese resistance, they have been the biggest side sacrificing for Gaza when other Arab governments and regimes have been spending their money and time partying while the people of Gaza are killed. The Lebanese resistance has sacrificed the most following the Palestinian resistance, and we are still talking about a continuation of the resistance fronts, albeit in different types of dynamics, with different types of interpretations based on different developments. Because don't forget, in the beginning with Lebanon, it was a supporting front, and later on, it became a war as well. I hope this summarizes the situation when it comes to the ceasefire, and of course, more can be spoken about in that regard, especially as to why Israel is taking this position. But just to wrap up the whole thing. And the second thing that I want to talk to you about, is a couple of statements coming from the supreme leader of Iran, Sayyid Ali Khamenei. He had a speech during which there was a ceremony for the Basij in Iran, and he had a meeting with them, a speech really to them, to talk about recent developments. So he spoke about internal stuff, but part of his speech was in relation to Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel and the resistance fronts in the region, and during which he stated a couple of important things. One of them is the ICC's arrest warrants are not enough and that Benjamin Netanyahu should be executed. This is what Sayyid Ali Khamenei said. He has faith that the resistance is victorious. All assumptions of the enemy's victory are wrong. The resistance is victorious in Gaza and in Lebanon. The images of destruction in Gaza and in Lebanon are against Israel, not for it. It's a proof for its failure, trying to cover it up. The ICC's arrest warrant against Netanyahu is not enough. There should be a death sentence handed to Netanyahu. He should be executed. Israel continues to kill innocent civilians, and its continuation of that adds more power to the resistance. The more fierce the enemy is against civilians, the stronger the resistance gets, because it adds more fuel to them. the resistance front will increase in coming months and years after these Israeli crimes. The interesting point, well, of course, two interesting points. The fact that he's asking for capital punishment for Benjamin Netanyahu. And, well, Hezbollah have confirmed that they are trying to kill him. So they are trying to actually implement that death sentence for Benjamin Netanyahu. And also the fact that we are talking about a growth in the resistance front. This is an interesting point from the supreme leader of Iran, the fact that he's talking about an increase in the resistance front. What does that mean? Does that mean he's talking about more movements joining in, or countries going in the resistance fronts? Well, we heard talks previously about more countries joining in and more countries having organizations that will be focused primarily on resistance, but that could be implemented in multiple ways. Now, that's happening with an increased collaboration between not only Iran and the existing resistance fronts, but Iran and other countries too. Other countries that are, some of them are surprising. So will they declare certain things after that? Again, we don't know, but the statement is quite interesting. And we also had, I wanted to clarify further when it comes to the position of Hamas when it comes to the ceasefire. This was the statement, or some of the statements that came from the senior figure of Hamas, Sam Hamdan. He had an interview with Al-Mayadeen. He said, Hezbollah helped our people. Hezbollah helped our people, and any announcement of a ceasefire in Lebanon makes us happy. Hamas leader Sam Hamdan confirms Palestinian resistance positions regarding the negotiations on Gaza and talks the situation of the Israeli prisoners in the Strip. He spoke with Al-Mayadeen, confirming that the occupying entity is trying to achieve what they're trying to achieve. They're trying to achieve what it failed to achieve in the field, saying that it will not happen. Hamdan explained in an interview with Al-Mayadeen today, that Monday, that talk about a 5-day truce in Gaza and then returning to fighting does not achieve the Palestinians' demanding, we are concerned with stopping the aggression against our people. He said the occupation wants to retrieve prisoners by the resistance, and for the latter to raise the flag of surrender and then decide whether it wants to stop the war or not. We are trying to protect our people with strategic protection by removing this entity so that the region can live in security and peace. He continued in relation to the Israeli prisoners, because don't forget we had a declaration that one of them was killed by an Israeli strike, like over half of them now. If news of the resistance captors is cut off, news of the Israeli prisoners is cut off. The resistance member who cares for the Israeli prisoner is martyred. Their lives become in danger when they lose those who care for them. No one can make any certainty about the status of the prisoners in Gaza. Regarding the relationship with Qatar, Hamas leader confirmed that this relationship was expressed in Doha by saying that we say that our relationship with Qatar is deeper than what the occupation is trying to show. Now, with regards to the ceasefire in Lebanon, on the Lebanese front, Hamdan described what happened yesterday when the resistance carried out 51 operations as one of God's glorious days, stressing that it was a clear message from the Lebanese resistance to the Israeli occupation. He also pointed out that Islamic resistance in Lebanon continues despite all the sacrifices and makes the occupation pay the price and its officials go into shelters. The announcements of a ceasefire in Lebanon makes us happy because Hezbollah stood by our people and made great sacrifices. Hamdan stressed that the resistance in Lebanon deserves to be supported despite all attempts by some to incite division and strife on sectarian grounds. This is very important. Noting that we in the axis of resistance trust each other and coordinate on all details. These statements are important. Any announcement makes us happy in Lebanon. It should be supported. The resistance, despite all attempts by some to incite division and strife on sectarian grounds, noting that we in the axis of resistance trust each other and coordinate all the details. But you will still hear some people coming up and trying to cause frictions and problems, to deviate from the other party's problems and divisions and the fact that they are on their way out, completely out. As for the internal Palestinian issue, Hamdan announced the success of the Cairo meeting with the Fatah movement in agreeing on a framework to form a committee to manage the affairs on the Gaza Strip. This is happening simultaneously with the talks that have been happening in Lebanon. Because don't forget, before Hamas told them we're not talking. He pointed out that a second meeting with Fatah was expected to complete the arrangement, but that was delayed due to developments including the martyrdom of Yahya Sinwar. He stressed that the Hamas position is that the national unity government should be formed to manage the affairs for the Palestinians, but this has not been approved yet. This is an important statement clarifying the position of Hamas when it comes to Lebanon. And again, we're seeing developments on that front. And all of the talks about ceasefire, both in Lebanon and potentially in Gaza too, are temporary. Nothing is yet concrete, nothing yet is complete. However, when it comes to Lebanon, it came following a massive defeat and humiliation of the genocide army in Gaza. The majority of the losses of the Israeli army have been in Gaza. Gaza's resistance targeted over 1,200 Israeli vehicles, 1,000 of which are Merkavas targeted. Some of them were destroyed completely. Others were damaged significantly. And in many cases, everything was burned, including troop carriers with the soldiers inside them. And then they decided, of course, Israel to go on this escalation with Lebanon, only to face a strong resistance in Lebanon. And of course, with the developments internally, with the massive losses in the army, you're talking about a failed army, failed state, failed economy, people refusing to serve in the army, people from all backgrounds refusing to serve more and more now in Israel. Many of these who are wounded have lost a limb or two. All of that is giving more pressure on them when it comes to Lebanon, especially because of Hezbollah's stronger position too. They tried to weaken the position of Hezbollah, but they did not succeed. Again, they think they can kill the spirit of the people, and their love for the resistance. But again, that fails. But however, all of the talk is temporary. Tomorrow we're going to have a confirmation coming from Israel after the cabinet meeting of Benjamin Netanyahu with his cabinet, whether they approve or not. If they do approve, we're talking about a pilot of 60 days. Following that, what will happen in the meantime in Gaza, all of these things will be clarified as well in coming days too.